Little intro. MJ is the CMO at CoLab, which is a B2B software company. Are you guys around 100 people right now? Is that roughly?
Right around 100. Yeah, I think we actually just crossed 90 last week.
Very cool. And you were previously, I think, VP growth at Refine Labs, which if people are familiar with Chris Walker, that name maybe rings a bell. And you're very active on LinkedIn. I love your posts and always share interesting things. And obviously, this podcast is called The Founder That Marketing Show. And given that you posted a couple months ago around how you're helping your CEO, Adam, be more active on LinkedIn and kind of your process behind it and some of the results, I wanted to get you on to kind of pick your brain and let people pick your brain. So yeah, the 2 sentences from you. I don't know who you are and maybe what CoLab does from your perspective in 2 sentences.
Yeah, I lead marketing and sales development. And CoLab is, we build collaboration tools for mechanical engineering teams to review designs and track issues and improve those designs so they can build the best product possible.
Very cool. And my first question is, the initial post that made me want to do this, I think you mentioned that currently Adam's content on LinkedIn is contributing something like 19% of pipeline. Is this directionally accurate? Have you guys added more channels? Is it more or less now? Can you give people an idea there?
Yeah, it fluctuates quarter to quarter. But in Q4, the stat was 19% of qualified pipeline came from Adam's presence on LinkedIn, which we capture in CRM with a dedicated custom field that is called Adam Keating's DMs.
Very cool. And then do you consider anything where if someone doesn't come through the DM, but they book a demo on the website and they say they heard through you through LinkedIn, do you consider that Adam? Or
Usually we consider that CoLab's LinkedIn because we are also running organic social from the company page as well as a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. And people, when they come through ads, they just say LinkedIn, except the rare few. A lot of times they even don't know that it was an ad. I noticed
Yeah,
that
so
with questions.
that's one of the challenges you kind of got to work through from an attribution perspective.
Yeah.
We don't have total visibility into that, but at the present moment, I'm comfortable that investing in CoLab's LinkedIn and Adam's LinkedIn are both generating results for us.
Yeah. Do you have an SDR in his DMs, or is it just Adam managing it all and sending a link or whatever when needed?
Yeah, it's just Adam managing it all, which maybe isn't sustainable for the long term. But at the moment, if you DM Adam, it's actually him responding to you.
That's awesome. Can you give me an idea? I know you guys don't share this data, but 19% of pipeline, like what are we talking in terms of like some range of number in terms of qualified pipeline?
Yeah, it's a 7 figures of pipeline quarter.
Okay. So over 1 million. There you go, guys. Over 1 million in pipeline generated in a quarter.
Yeah, every quarter. So
Wow.
it's like mid to high 7 figures for the whole pipeline.
Okay. So wow, that's shows the potential. Now, my next question is, why did you decide to have him post on LinkedIn? Because you sell to a very technical audience, mechanical engineers. How did you make that decision that it's worthwhile for him to be active on LinkedIn?
Yeah, there are mechanical engineering folks, mechanical engineering leadership would be our ideal customer profile that spend time on LinkedIn, that engage with content on LinkedIn. In general, individual pages get more reach than company pages. And I think they get more engagement too, which I do think comes back to a little bit of human nature. Just people like to hear from and engage with people. And I've actually thought a little bit about how brands engage on other platforms, TikTok, Twitter, etc. And it's funny to see how especially B2C brands act like people on those platforms. But I haven't really seen that come over to LinkedIn.
Right.
So in general,
You mean like Taco Bell replying to a tweet and it's like kind of quirky and funny?
yes, yeah, exactly. So brands act like people on other platforms, but brands currently I haven't seen any brand pages that act like people on LinkedIn. So the primary way to make it feel like a human interaction is just to do it from a person's profile, right?
Did you do literally last week chatted to a company that's selling an IoT device and they're selling to antenna engineers.
Mm-hmm.
And we went on Sales Navigator and we searched for antenna engineers, and there's people on LinkedIn like that they're not very active, right? When you switch on the posted on LinkedIn, like almost none of them post on LinkedIn. How would you evaluate, like, what's the critical mass? Do you have anything in mind, like, that you need to see if you're selling to very technical niche roles?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're selling to very technical and niche roles, your total addressable market is already small, right?
Right.
So, and there are already probably not that many ways to reach them, such that like a high number of people that you're reaching at any given time are actually in your ICP, right? You're not going to run a Super Bowl ad because 0.001% of the people that see that ad are actually going to be relevant to you. So, what's actually great about LinkedIn is, regardless of the size of your total addressable market, you can apply techniques and tactics to make sure that the people that you're reaching there, whether it's a small number of people or a large number of people, are mostly relevant people, which to me is the best way to make the most efficient use of your marketing time and your marketing dollars.
What are some of those tactics?
So, I mean, if I had a really small ICP, I would use the founder profile, and I would just proactively connect with the like bullseye target market people. LinkedIn used to be a little bit more liberal about how many connection requests they'd let you send in a day. They're kind of like dialing that back a little bit now. So you have to be careful not to get in the LinkedIn jail. But yeah, like if you send a connection request to the right kinds of people, that's how your content shows up in their feed. And then, of course, you can also have organic growth if you have a post that goes bonkers and people see it that way, and then they follow you from there.
Yeah, I like that. I think right now we're like 20 per day seems to be like a safe number. Like that's the number that I'll throw out there. I don't know if you have a different number. One other thing that I notice helps is like literally calling out the person in your book and talking. If I was a antenna engineer or if I was designing, like don't have the hook of your post, the first thing that you say, be something super generic. Make it obvious that to that engineer or whatever you're selling to, that you're talking to them, because that will make it more likely that they will engage with it, and that will roll it then obviously out to their network. So I noticed that call outs help. Okay. I was very curious in your post that you put out there, and I'll drop the link here in the chat if you guys want to take a look at that. Oh, there we go. You mentioned that the first step that you guys did was co-write or together write a strategic narrative document that was like 2 to 3 pages. I'm sure you're not able to share that, but can you explain to me what that looks like what's in there?
Yeah. If you actually go to the page on our website called Why CoLab in the company menu, that's like kind of a pared down version of what's in that strategic narrative doc. So if people are interested, that's one place you could look. But we used Andy Raskin's framework for this. I believe he coined the term strategic narrative, but the way I describe it is a strategic narrative is a story that answers the question, why your brand and why now? And he provides a 5-part framework for building, a compelling story that answers those 2 questions. Name the shift that's happening in your buyer's world, show that there will be winners and losers, demonstrate like the obstacle, like that there's kind of this future promised land, that if they can make the shift or respond appropriately to the shift that's happening, that they will reach this promised land, and then demonstrate the obstacles between current state and how to get to the promised land, connecting your kind of the way you've built your technology to overcoming those obstacles, and tie it all together with proof that you've helped other companies achieve the promised land. So personally, I find the most difficult part of this and the most essential part of this to be describing the shift appropriately. So for us, we went through several iterations of this, but really the shift that we identified that's going on in the world of engineering is that products are more complex, right? The products today that you're buying as a consumer or that businesses are buying B2B are, not only mechanically complex, but they're electrically complex, and software has to work with hardware, and that gets more and more challenging to keep up with every year. And as a direct result of that, engineering teams and the cross-functional teams they work with end up having a lot more people on them, each with different, very specialized expertise. And therefore, you have to figure out how to get all of those people's feedback, keep it together, track it, and make sure that it makes it into the end product. And if you try to do that with spreadsheets, PowerPoint decks, lots and lots of meetings, like just the sheer volume of feedback that you're now getting from all the experts on your team becomes rather overwhelming, creates a lot of admin work, and creates an unacceptable risk that kind of errors and issues will slip through the cracks. So the shift really is you have more people, right? More experts on your team. And it took us a lot of conversations internally to arrive at that. But once you can connect all those dots, it's really easy to tell the story of why CoLab and why now.
And so is the output almost, I think Devin Reed or Chris Walker talk about like your unique point of view. Is that kind of that? Like, what's your point of view on the market and why this matters?
Yeah, I think it's specifically your point of view on like what has changed in the market. What's the most important change in the market that's happening right now? Because especially if you're selling to an executive, you have to not only convince them that there's like an ROI to investing in your product and how you do things, but that it is one of the three most important things that they could do this year, right? Because any given exec is not really going to focus on more than three things at any one time.
I think it's good, maybe you disagree, to highlight here that before you can write this, you actually need to have a POV. And I think most companies just don't. It's just, they offer SEO services and it's the same as everyone else. And they kind of compete on, price or something, but there's no differentiated view on why we do this or why we do it differently or what's our unique approach that's different to all the other SEO agencies. And so you can try to write this document, but unless you actually have that, it's not going to help you.
Yeah, I think strategic narrative works really well for like a disruptive tech company because and you don't have a ton of direct competitors. It's often not like a commoditized product or service. And so it often is the reason that you built the technology in that particular way is linked back to one fundamental insight, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy to identify what that insight is. Hence, in our example, we had to go through multiple iterations before we really dialed this in. But it does mean that there is usually like a fundamental insight available if you do the hard thinking about it that helps you build a compelling narrative. I would say for companies operating in more commoditized industries, it's still possible. But generally that insight is less. I mean, it might be about a shift in the world, but it's an insight about differentiation, right? How do you do SEO differently? And I actually think Chris, who is the founder I used to work for, is a great example of this, right? Demand gen agencies are fairly commoditized, but he had a unique point of view on how to do demand gen that he explained in a very compelling way, and that's why that company took off and just had incredible growth.
Yeah. I realized that I rushed ahead here a little bit. I want to take a step back because I feel like what most people in this call, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, probably struggle with is that the first step before you can help your CEO post on LinkedIn and we can dive into the tactics and stuff, you need to actually convince your CEO that they should post on LinkedIn. So MJ, maybe take us back to your conversation with Adam, how that went, what your arguments were for, hey, we need to do this. Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, so I guess first and foremost, it wasn't that hard for me to convince Adam to do it because Adam buys into one fundamental idea, which is that as the CEO, he should be the face of the company. And so from there, it's sort of a natural extension to, well, if you're going to be the face of the company internally to investors at conferences, it's not that much of a mental leap to say you should also be the face of the company digitally. But now, I don't think that every CEO feels like they want to be the face of the company or feels comfortable being the face of the company. So in that case, I think it is also totally appropriate if there is somebody else who is a more natural fit for that role of face of the company. Maybe it's the chief strategy officer, maybe it's the CTO. Then maybe you build the brand around that person. But I would start by looking for who tends to run the all hands meeting, who tends to speak to the board or lead the board meeting, who speaks at conferences, right? Because all you're doing is replicating a lot of those things that they do already in their job in a digital forum.
Got it. And did you guys have any discussion about timeline, ROI? How do we budget for this? How long do we run it to try it out? In that terms of...
Yeah, not really formally. I mean, like I started at CoLab and we were basically just barely past product market fit. And so it wasn't, we didn't scrutinize every bet that we were placing because if we did that, we wouldn't be able to move as fast as we needed to. So it was like fairly unstructured in the beginning. The types of conversations we have now are a little bit more structured. But I think in general, if you're standing up something from scratch, like don't overcomplicate it, right? Because you won't make any progress. So I think Chris actually talks about this a lot. Like what's kind of a low investment, a thing like experiment that you can try to generate, like look for positive signals, right? Like, can your CEO commit to posting twice a week for 6 weeks? And can we look for, 5 customers or ICP people making like a comment or even just liking the post, right? Like they saw it, they liked it, or mentioning it to you in a call, right? Let's see if we can produce that effect 5 times. And if we can produce that effect 5 times, then maybe we'll double our effort and we'll produce that effect 10 times, right? Or maybe we'll have somebody go in and send out connection requests and see if we can get even more engagement. But in the beginning, don't invest $1 million and don't expect $1 million in pipeline, right? Invest like an experiment level of effort and expect kind of early signals rather than like full-blown pipeline. And those early signals are going to be your evidence that you should invest more effort and build towards kind of more of a full-blown at-scale motion.
Right. And a lot of them are going to be qualitative, and you need to have common sense that if an ICP that is not a customer writes a thoughtful comment on your CEO's post, that's probably a good sign, even though they've not paid or become a customer or are in pipeline yet. Okay. What did it work right away in a sense when you guys decided, okay, we'll do this? Did you immediately see some version of result, or did you guys have to iterate and experiment first a lot?
Well, when I joined Adam's, LinkedIn was the number one source of pipeline for the whole company.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, and there wasn't a lot of pipeline in the whole company. But his LinkedIn was the main source of at least inbound. That was content, or was he doing outbound? No, content.
Okay, so he was already doing some content by himself.
He was already doing some content, yeah. But obviously, he does a lot of things, right? He wears a lot of hats. So, like some quarters he has a lot of time for it, and some quarters he doesn't. And you could actually at the time, because the pipeline overall was like smaller, it really skewed the pipeline up and down, right? Like we had our best pipeline quarters when he was applying the most effort, and then our worst pipeline quarters when he didn't have time for it. And now it's a little bit more stable, right? Because we have other sources of pipeline to round it out. But from the beginning, it was clear that when he puts effort there, it yields results.
And what would you consider those efforts besides putting out content, or is it just writing?
It's mostly putting out content for sure.
Okay. Do you have him, or does he like engage on the platform, spend some time, I don't know, engaging with mechanical engineers or thought leaders in that space?
I think he does, but it's not necessarily part of some really well thought out strategy. I think he just sort of, if he sees a customer post, he'll like it, he'll comment on it. Our ICP, unlike maybe like a sales and marketing ICP, or, who else is super active on LinkedIn? I don't know if you sold to agency owners, is not necessarily creating a ton of their own content. So there's not as much available to engage with. And a lot of the content that our ICP puts out is like content about the company, right? At product announcements, which is cool. Like we like to celebrate our customers' wins. But it's not, there's not a lot of customers putting out like point of view type content that we can engage with,
Yeah. Okay. So what would you tell a marketer? They're now going to go to their CEO, and maybe they're going to talk about, hey, you're already the face of the company offline, so maybe we should do that online. Clearly our audience is on LinkedIn. Here's some proof for that. Let's run an experiment, do it for 6 weeks. You commit to posting twice a week. What other expectations would you set them going into this, like in terms of like how much time is required from them on a daily or weekly basis, in terms of the things that they should be looking out for? Is it just a comment by an ICP or something else on top of that? How would you run that conversation as a marketing leader who maybe doesn't quite have a CEO that's as bought in as Adam was when you approached him?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you want to create a situation where the CEO is only doing the things that only they can do. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of marketers ask the CEO to do too much, right? Of of the things that not necessarily only they can do. And so that's why this strategic narrative exercise of really nailing down the company story, what's the insight, what's the shift, why is the technology built the way it is, what are like the 2 or 3 most important features that really tie back to the transformation that we want to drive for our customers. Like all of that strategy work is the type of thing that the CEO must be involved with, and therefore is something that only they can do. Writing a post, once you have those ideas really clear, is not necessarily something that only they can do. Like you can write posts for them, and then it comes back around to the final finishing touches, like writing the post that really sounds like them is something that only they can do, right? So the way we do it is we start with a strategic narrative, which we already aligned on. You do that once, right? And it feeds all sorts of things in the company, not just this. Then the marketing team can turn it into lots of posts, and Adam can choose what post resonates with him that day, and he can polish, like last 20%, his tone of voice, maybe a specific insight from a customer that, was a call that he was on that the marketing team was not on, spin that in there, right? And make it really feel like it truly came from him. So the 2 parts of the equation that only he can do are the strategy and the personal tone of voice. Everything in the middle can be done by someone else. So that's an opportunity for us to take it off his plate and make it an easier lift for him.
And you talk me through how you turn that 2 to 3 page strategic narrative doc into ongoing weekly content. Like I have a hard time picturing this, I guess. I can see myself turning it into 10 posts, maybe 15. But then talk me through that.
Yeah. Well, if your strategic narrative is done really well, then like basically anything that happens in the business can be tied back to it. So Adam might have a conversation with an engineering leader and they'll say, oh my God, my team is so burned out, right? And at first glance, that might not seem connected to this idea that products are more complex, you need more feedback from more specialized experts, and the tools you have to manage those processes are allowing errors and things to slip through the cracks. However, if you think about it a little bit harder, you will realize that as a result of the sheer volume of feedback from all the different experts, you're creating a ton of admin work, right? Because that feedback has to be manually tracked by someone in a spreadsheet. And somebody has to go check that each line item out of the 4,000 issues that you found in your 5-year product development project has been appropriately added into the CAD model, right? And you have to make sure that, that file, the newest version, gets sent to your supplier so they send you the right part. And so all of these things are like manual things that an engineer has to go and do. And so it's not that surprising that with all of this admin work that is being created by the fact that we're jamming all of this complex feedback into an outdated process, it's burning your team out, right? And so what you do is, like, your CEO experiences the business all day, every day, talks to lots of customers, like what's happening, what happened today, right? What are some interesting observations or conversations you had? Let's tie that back into the strategic narrative. So you have a constant stream of new observations happening in the business, and then you just connect them back to that core story.
How do you get that from Adam? Is that like a daily or weekly call you have with them?
Yeah, you can do it. Honestly, a 30-minute call can give you content for like 6 weeks. 30-minute call, like if you prep for it, and you ask them good questions, you can get, 20 posts out of a 30-minute call.
So you're looking for these bits like, oh yeah, I talked to this engineering leader and he told me that their team is burned out. That's all you need. You then tie it into the strategic narrative. You write a post that's almost done, and then that goes back to Adam to make it his own, add his own tone of voice so he can publish it. Do you run these calls with him or someone?
Sometimes I run them. Sometimes Mary, our head of content.
Okay.
And sometimes I just, like, he says something to me in a one-to-one and I put it in the backlog. Like, sometimes it doesn't come from a structured call.
Yeah.
I just have meetings about other things with him, and customer insights come up as a result of those meetings. Like, you could pull stuff out of their sales calls too. You could pull stuff out of, like, they might be talking to the product team about the roadmap. You could pull stuff out of there. Like, the CEO is constantly, like, just leaving a trail of customer insights and market insights behind them in every meeting they attend. So you could probably do this whole thing without a structured meeting at all.
Yeah. Have you noticed any favorite questions to ask that pulls out particularly interesting things?
A question that I asked that made Adam really rack his brain recently was, can you tell me about a time that CoLab delivered on our promises when a customer was initially skeptical?
Okay. And so the idea is to overcome the skepticism that probably other customers have, and okay, interesting. Any other recurring question you ask on almost every call you have with them? Is it just like, hey, any interesting conversations you had?
I think that's the gist of it, right?
But then he almost needs to know what's interesting. I feel like oftentimes CEOs, or they've been doing this for so long, they talk to so many people, it's always around the same topics. That's just like, yeah, same old, like they struggle with this and I told them this, and they had this problem, which is a problem we solve for all customers. So we kind of talked about that. They kind of need
Yeah.
to have a brain for that, no? Or do you disagree?
Well, I don't see that as a huge problem, that idea of being repetitive and saying the same thing over and over again in a million different ways, because I think there was some famous research on this published at one time or another that like somebody needs to hear the same thing 6 or 7 times before it actually sticks with them. And
I don't
marketers are
disagree
always
with that.
yeah.
What I'm getting at is when you ask them anything interesting that happened in a conversation, that their reply is like, no, sales calls, usual.
I mean, you could just say, "Tell me about the last product demo you had. What's the last feature you demo? What did you say about it?" Right? Or,
Right. Of
um,
course it.
what was the last thing a customer was really happy about? What was the last thing a customer was really frustrated with? Anything like that. Literally, just tell me about the last conversation you had with a customer. Right?
Yeah. You've now put out, or Adam has now put out a lot of, by the way, guys, I put the link to Adam's profile in here. I realized that you guys might not know what we're talking about, so have a look at Adam. You guys have now put out a lot of content. Have you noticed any patterns between those who do particularly well versus the ones that fall flat?
I do think the hook determines whether it's going to go bonkers or not. However, I'll caveat that with one thing that I talk to Adam a lot about is not every post needs to go bonkers, right? Like, not every post needs to have 500 likes and 100,000 impressions. You might have a post that gets, 8,000 impressions, which is like a below average post for Adam because he has over 20,000 followers. 8,000 impressions and 35 likes, but somebody DMs you about it and it turns into an opportunity. And you might have a post with 500 likes and 100,000 impressions that doesn't actually generate any opportunities. And so if you're not getting a ton of posts that just take off, it should not be taken as a signal that you should stop doing it. Because actually the most important thing is to get good, clear, consistent messaging in front of your ICP regularly, right? That's the value of this exercise. And viral posts is not the best way to measure that.
Says MJ Smith, whose posts always get like 500 likes. Love it. Do you guys have any downstream effects from putting out all of that messaging and getting this real-time feedback? And do you leverage that in any way?
Yeah, I do. On the one hand, you don't want to only optimize for engagement. On the other hand, it is very interesting to see which posts do get the most engagement, right? Adam wrote, the reason that I picked out that thing about burnout and how it's connected back to our strategic narrative is because Adam, first of all, he hears about burnout in a lot of customer calls. And so then we said, okay, well, let's talk about how burnout is connected back to what CoLab solves for. And then that post went pretty bonkers. And I was like, okay, this is an angle or a symptom where there's a lot of pain. So maybe we should be talking about this more and doing more content around it because it's something that people are perhaps motivated to solve for, more so than maybe some of the other symptoms or pain points that we might hypothesize that customers are experiencing. So I do think it creates a bit of a feedback loop around messaging that resonates.
You mentioned that the hook matters a lot, and for context, for people, the hook is the first, I guess, sentence of your LinkedIn post, the first 2 to 3 lines of text. Have you noticed any patterns there of like what makes a good hook?
Stories. It's funny. Adam was like, "Oh, it's interesting. My posts always go viral when I say something like 3 years ago we were doing this," right? And like 3 years ago is basically a version of Once Upon a Time, right? And we know as humans that Once Upon a Time is going to be followed by a story. I think people crave that on LinkedIn because a lot of stuff you see on LinkedIn is not like real and tangible and practical. It's like and theoretical. And so when somebody sees something that signals, oh, I'm going to hear about like an actual real life thing that happens, that's like the type of post they want to click see more and read the whole thing.
Right. Yeah. Rachel said, love these tips, MJ. Dave said, super helpful comments, tips. Have you had any success with video interviews or is it just text posts?
Yeah, interestingly, so when I post, my text posts do the best by far. I suppose yesterday I posted an image that did well, but that's like out of the ordinary for me. It was an image of text too.
Yeah.
With Adam, total opposite. If he posts something visual, it always does better. Which is interesting because my following is obviously mostly sales and marketing people. His following is mostly engineers. Engineers find visuals very compelling. That makes sense, like when you think about it retroactively. But we really like had to figure out that like Adam's posts do better when there is an accompanying visual. So we are trying to do a lot more visual and a lot more video incorporated into Adam's LinkedIn. We don't we usually clip up like video clips from webinars and things and distribute them via the company page and via paid. But actually, one thing we're thinking about doing is creating a unique visual identity for Adam's LinkedIn. It's one of the projects that our brand new graphic designer is going to dig into in the next couple of months.
You mean like in terms of colors and fonts, that's kind of separate but adjacent to the CoLab branding?
Yeah, colors, fonts. Probably not so much colors and fonts as like illustration style and imagery and things like that. But something that what we're going for is something that will catch an engineer's eye and be like, oh, this is an engineering thing. I should look at it, right? And also something that over time, as people have more impressions of this, they'll be like, oh, that's an Adam Keating post, which I'm not a designer, so I have no idea how we're going to pull that off, but I'm confident that we have the right smart people on our team who will help us develop something cool around that.
Love it. And I'll just add one caveat because sometimes people hear this stuff and they're like, oh, and it just need to attach a picture to my post and it will do better. And then they'll attach some random stock photo. The pictures do better when it's adding stuff. Like I think the reason why your text post did, your image post did so well is because you showcase the taglines and then you color code them, and so it's actually beneficial. Like you're making it better than by not having that picture because it's so much clearer. But if you just attach some random picture that you pulled off of, I don't know, and I'll just link the post here so people know what we're talking about. Okay, interesting. So you pre-write the posts, Adam finishes it. Does he publish himself or do you hit the post button? Talking about like really only things he needs to do. Technically, he doesn't need to hit the publish button.
He does hit the publish button. I think they're like, I don't think he needs to, but it's like he's going to polish up the last 20% anyway. So you might as well just like, okay, it's done. Like it's done now. I'm going to publish it. And then also if he publishes it, he usually stays online for 10, 15 minutes to respond to the first couple comments. So I think that's also another benefit of having them hit publish.
Yeah. Rachel, no stock photos, right? Yeah, I don't use stock photos. I also found updates that involve the company itself and the people there work well. I agree. Christina's asking, how do you handle the leads that come in from his LinkedIn? Is he filling out the CRM?
I think sometimes he does fill out the CRM, but sometimes he just sends them in Slack. That like, I found myself saying this on a lot of interviews with people that thinking about joining CoLab. Like CoLab is a top 1% power user of Slack, which I'm sure some people would think is a red flag, but that's a transparent look into our culture and how we operate. So if it goes into Slack, like it will be followed up on.
Interesting. Do you guys use any thought leader ads or leverage any of the posts for thought leader ads?
We do. And the thought leader ads get by far the most engagement on paid. Our demand gen managers, our director of demand gen's working theory right now is they get the most engagement, but they are not necessarily the ones that produce the most conversions. So he sort of like manually toggles them on and off based on what sorts of outcomes he's trying to drive in any particular day. But if you don't pay attention to those thought leader ads, they do get a ton of engagement and they will eat up a lot of your budget. So you want to be careful with the budget allocation if you also want to be optimizing for conversion.
How do you think about the right goals to have with thought leader ads? Like, should you track conversions? Is it brand awareness? Is it?
I think it probably, you could take it a number of different directions. I believe that we are probably, I don't know the details to be completely transparent, but we're probably optimizing for reach on those and not conversions. It really depends like on the content of the post too. Like sometimes Adam literally just posts about the product, right? And so that's like a bottom of funnel. Yeah, you should probably be measuring that one on conversions. A lot of his posts though are connected back into the strategic narrative, which is more of a reach brand awareness thing. Another way I've been really thinking about LinkedIn ads generally, is we use them as a method of fishing for philosophical alignment. So you put out like a strong point of view and you see who engages with that point of view. Philosophical alignment is not something that you can just bake into a persona doc. Like firmographics do not predict philosophical alignment, but liking and engaging with a post that has a strong point of view is a clear indicator of philosophical alignment. And in general, if you have philosophical alignment and a firmographic ICP fit, those are going to be very motivated buyers.
And is philosophical alignment kind of like basically they agree with your point of view, with your strategic narrative?
Yep. Or like certain like tip of the iceberg statements that are related to our strategic narrative. So as an example, we're running an ad right now. It's not a thought leader ad. It's just an image ad. And it says like engineering leaders need to pull risk forward by conducting more thorough design reviews to catch errors earlier in the NPD process, right? Pull risk forward, which is like you need to find issues and opportunities in your design earlier rather than later. That's how you save money and prevent like expensive late stage errors. Some people care about that. Some people are like, I think I should spend my time elsewhere. The people who are liking that post have philosophical alignment with CoLab that perhaps a top 3 problem to solve in your business is the quality of your design reviews.
And then do you go outbound to those people, or do you use that information to inform like your website messaging, or what do you do with it?
A lot of times we go outbound, and the conversion rate on an outbound message to someone who has philosophical alignment confirmed via engagement on LinkedIn is much, much higher than just a cold prospect.
Interesting. That's really cool. We got some questions here. Well, Birgit has to leave. She just said, thank you for the helpful tips. We'll watch the recording. John Linford asks, any advice for rapidly scaling follower count? We're starting at 800 followers for my CEO, and it's all in his old industry. Worth starting content without the following to warm up the algo?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fastest way to grow your follower count is to send 20 connection requests a day. And it's going to take a little while, but I mean, that's 100 connections a week. If he's only at 800, you're going to be double in 8 weeks. So that's pretty good. And yeah, I mean, I think it's good to build the muscle of content. And so like maybe in the beginning, posting content is not going to be your main way of attracting followers, but you get better at it the more you do it. So it's worth starting that at the same time as doing the connection requests. And you can always boost it paid, right? You can get more reach before you have a huge organic following.
Yeah, the only 2 things I would add is, one, I think network hygiene matters. And so if you have a bunch of connections of relevant people who, I don't know for what reason you accepted them, but you don't know them, you're never going to sell to them, you should probably disconnect with them. And there's tools that you can help automate that to make sure that I would rather have 400 connections that are like super relevant than like 2,000 as a bunch of randos. The other one I would say is call outs. If you're trying to reach specifically one persona, I would work a lot with call outs. And those can be literally like calling them out by the words, meaning if you're a mechanical engineer at a manufacturer, here's how I would approach, or here's how to approach, or visual call outs where if you're selling to frontline workers or to, I don't know, what are the visual cues that will make that type of person immediately realize that this is for them? Maybe it's a high visibility vest or something in the picture, and it's like, okay, so you'll make it easier for people to recognize you as kind of one of them, I guess.
Yeah, back to our conversation too at the beginning of the call. If your TAM, total addressable market, is small, then the total number of connections that you could possibly have, or total number of followers that are relevant that you could possibly have, is not that large, right? So it might actually be totally fine if your CEO never surpasses 3,000 followers, right? I assume if you're trying to build an extremely valuable business, if you have a small total addressable market, that you have a very high annual contract value. And so 3,000 followers that could buy a product for $1 million a year is probably a great asset from a marketing perspective to work with. So you might not have to worry if you don't have 50,000 or $100,000.
He also asked any experience with LinkedIn groups.
We don't do a ton with LinkedIn groups, which doesn't necessarily mean they don't work. It just we don't have a ton of experience there.
Yeah, same. I think communities are really cool. Like there's lots of Slack or Discord or offline circle communities, and I think being active there can be really beneficial if your ICP is really engaged there, both to build relationships and then to get content ideas, because you can see what questions people ask and what they care about and what they talk about, and that can then fuel your content ideas. Kierina asked, would you change anything about your approach if instead of selling a product, you were selling a service in highly regulated industries like finance, healthcare, government, with long sales cycles?
Well, our sales cycle is fairly long. It's probably about 6 months. So I think from the sales cycle perspective, there's probably overlap.
I feel like someone selling to governments would be so excited about a 6-month sales cycle.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe it's like an 8-month sales cycle. I do wonder how active that government ICP is on LinkedIn. I do a little bit of work consulting with a company that's an aerospace startup, and there are definitely people on LinkedIn that are adjacent to that industry, but we do a little bit more PR with them because we know their ICP is reading the publications more. So I think about that. Services versus products. I think this methodology works for services and for products. In fact, in some regards, I think services are easier to market on LinkedIn because you can talk about your approach and the results it yields, and what somebody is buying from you is literally the work getting done. Whereas with a product, they're buying the product and then they still have to do the work with the product to achieve the promised land, right? So it's like 2 steps versus 1 step. And so it actually, in a lot of cases, is less of a mental leap if you're selling services versus a product. And you could see a lot of really successful examples of people marketing services on LinkedIn.
Christine, you had a question around your CEO not wanting to be in the center of attention. Do you want me to frame it up, or you wanna frame it up yourself?
I can give it a shot. First of all, this has been really very insightful and helpful, so thank you. I have a CEO who he's facilitated this growth from 100 to 300 people. We're a nonprofit consulting firm. We work in a lot of different spaces with different clients, government, hospital, a lot of buying groups. And it has been like pulling teeth trying to get him to establish a point of view that he's comfortable with expressing externally, not just on LinkedIn, but more broadly. And so I think that's first and foremost, as you're talking about having a strong POV when you're working across. We work in lots of different states with lots of different types of clients. We have to be super careful about what we're saying because we work in public health, and public health is political and provocative. And, we might not have a shared message at the org level that resonates there. So I'm not totally sure if you have any additional insights on how to move the needle on developing that POV or building some level of comfort with being the face of the organization.
Yeah, I think when you first were chatting about that informally before the call, the first place my mind went is just kind of reframing a bit, because it does seem like the most important piece of work that your org needs to focus on is that strategy piece of what's our story, right? Why our organization, why now? And that's work that only the CEO can do, or the CEO with help of other people, but you can't do that work without the CEO. And so I would start there and just try to, before you post anything on LinkedIn, try to get to a place where you have a 2 to 3 page document that lays out a story that your CEO is comfortable with and excited about, right? And then that document becomes the source of truth that you can work from to start sharing bits and pieces publicly, because all these posts are just little snippets, right? You're building up the story puzzle piece by puzzle piece for people in public. But you can build it in private, right? Before you ever, share it publicly. And I think nonprofit is a cool place to try this exercise, because there's a lot of passionate people, right? Like, what do we really care about, and what's the change we're making in the world? Like, it's like there's so many excellent ways to answer that question in the nonprofit space. So I think it'd be a fun exercise to work through. Hard, but challenging, but fun.
Did that answer your question, Christine?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I feel like I knew the answer going in based on what you've said already, but that just emphasizes that strategy is essential to this exercise.
Right. I think one other comment that I would make sometimes that works with, I feel like CEOs who are not comfortable or don't want to be the center of attention or the face of the company, is to frame it as like, look, I understand, and this is not what this is about. This is about being a valuable resource to our customers, and it's about driving company growth and outcomes. And I believe that this is one of the biggest levers. So you can choose to be behind the scenes, but if we both agree that this is a big lever, then you're almost kind of being selfish here by wanting to be in the background and not be the face of the company if this is a big opportunity or a big lever. I have a question for you, MJ. What would you say when a company sells to many different personas? I have that conversation sometimes where a CEO tells me, look, for this use case or product line, we sell to the head of communications. And for this use case, we sell into the head of sales. And for this use case, we sell into the head of program management. And there's also the CFO and the CIO weighing in. And so is that just a company problem, or how would you think about, who do you talk to? Do you talk to everyone or no one, or yeah?
Yeah, multiple products, multiple personas is a huge marketing challenge, no matter what you're trying to do, right? If you're trying to build a website, if you're trying to build a LinkedIn presence, what have you, it's really challenging. Anthony Peary posted something about this exact topic today, which I thought was quite interesting. There's lots of ways to go about it, right? Some are more clear than others, but they require you to make tough choices. So the clearest way to do this is to say, I'm going to prioritize one product and one POV, right? And one persona. And that's going to be when I build the LinkedIn presence around. Now, of course, that requires you to make a tough choice to deprioritize those other ones. You could instead talk about all of them, or you could talk about at a higher level, like what the company stands for, and then occasionally mix in the product stuff. But as you move farther away from that specificity, that clarity around one product, one shift, one persona, that it's just going to be a little less clear. So, another perhaps approach would be prove this out with one product, one persona, one shift with one person's profile, and then create a second person's profile around, the program management use case or something like that. So I don't think there's like one silver bullet answer to that. I think it's a tough problem. However, I will also say in general, companies that have multiple products and multiple personas also have a lot more marketing resources at their disposal. So it should be easier to manage than if you just had a small scrap team.
And how would you think about if, let's say, we pick one product line, and especially when you sell into the enterprise, you often have the buying committee, right? You have the budget holder and the champion and the influencers and the end users, and then you have blockers of the CFO who can weigh in and just veto it and it doesn't go through. Yeah. Who of these people do you talk to? Because what the CFO cares about is fundamentally different to what the CRO cares about, is fundamentally different to what the head of compliance cares about, who will have a word on this. Which is the one that you pick, or how would you make that decision?
Yeah, I would probably recommend optimizing for your champion in these comms, and then, because that's the person that you want to come inbound, right? You want to build a champion, and then you want to work with that champion, same side of the table in the sales process, to tailor how you talk about the solution and the story to the blocker or the executive buyer or the CFO, etc. But I think those other members of the buying committee are best served by more of that personal sales touch. And so you should use your one-to-many comms for the champion. I think, does that mean your CEO can never post anything, addressed towards the blockers? Definitely not. But I would say 80% of the content should be champion persona. But you'll see posts from Adam that are about blockers and about things that he experiences in the sales cycle, things like that as well.
Interesting. All right, last question, and I give you guys also a last chance to. Oh, here we go. Pierre Rina. I'm sure I'm butchering that name. I'm so sorry. At which point of the company's marketing maturity is a good timing to build a CEO SME LinkedIn presence? What other fundamental functions need to be on point?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I would give the advice to any person in charge of pipeline or marketing, not to try to stand up too many not mature motions all at the same time, right? And so that naturally implies that, if you don't have this motion, is it the next most important thing that you could stand up? Or should you prioritize something else first? And I will say one thing to know about this motion is that it's probably a little bit slower to results than like leveraging paid, right? If my number one priority was just like get a bunch of pipeline as fast as I possibly can, and I was in a mature enough market category, I'd probably just run Google Ads, right? And just try to get as much pipeline that way. But eventually you're going to tap out like any of these quick results sort of channels. And so it might be worth thinking about like a portfolio approach, right? How long do I think this is going to take to really reach maturity? And at what point do I need another mature source of pipeline in the roster? So the answer is different based on timeline to results, based on what other mature channels you have, and based on, how your pipeline goals are stepping up over time.
Cool. I'll ask one last question, and if you guys want to squeeze one in, feel free. Do you notice any difference in the type of deals that come through Adam's DM who have been following in for a while versus other lead sources, let's say?
Yeah, really good question. And yes, absolutely. Much higher ACV, much shorter sales cycle length, and probably much higher conversion rate stage to stage.
Do you, when you say, and at the beginning you talked about 19% of pipeline, is that number of opportunities or total value of the opportunity?
I think it was total value of the opportunity, which does imply that it's perhaps a lower volume of opportunities with a higher annual contract value.
Right. Yeah. Because, I think it's important to look at that, which surprisingly many companies don't know how to do, at least in a proper way. And they compare apples to oranges. All right, MJ, this was awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I know you don't do a lot of these things. Pierina says, you made my day. Thanks for sharing. Christine said, thank you so much. I learned a lot. Julia says, thank you so much. Super insightful. There you go. Tino says, thanks. I will drop MJ's LinkedIn. I mean, I feel like you probably all know MJ. That's why you showed up here. But if you don't, follow her, connect with her, follow her content. She posts awesome stuff about LinkedIn. John says, this was great. David says, great. Matt said, great. Thanks. All right, guys, thank you for joining. Thank you, MJ. And if you missed some part of it, this will go out probably next week on our socials, podcast, YouTube. So,
all right.
Thanks, have a good day, everyone.
See you later.
See you. Bye-bye.